What's up, guys? Today I'll be reviewing the Spartus Olympus, which might just be one of my favorite 14mm paddles I've hit this year. I think there's a lot to like in this package, so let's get right into it. As a quick disclosure, Spartus did send these paddles to me for review, but no review was guaranteed, no money was paid for this review, and they had no input on the video. If you do decide to purchase one, I do have an affiliate link and discount code in the description to save you some money. The Olympus can be purchased for $200, but with discount code PB100, you can actually save 20% off temporarily, and this is part of our 100th podcast celebration. This sale will run until September 17th, and then the code PBStudio will save you 10% on any future orders after that date. But anyways, for the specs, you're looking at a hybrid-shaped paddle that measures in at 16.35 inches long, a 14mm core, 5.5-inch handle, though it is a little bit smaller than the typical 5.5-inch handle that you're probably used to. If you're thinking of something like a Carbon 1X or Yola Hyperion, this one is just a little bit tighter at the neck because of how the throat tapers out. So just be warned that if you have really large hands, this might be a little more difficult for that two-hander. For me, it wasn't much of an issue. The grip circumference is 4.25 inches. It's thermoformed raw carbon fiber face with a layer of fiberglass for extra pop. Swing weight between 109 and 112 according to the Olympus website, but both of mine actually tested at 107. I'm just going to assume that both of mine were probably some pretty big outliers. Now, the main point of differentiation for the Olympus is that it has what they're calling their Ascension Core. This is a foam-filled core in the cells, but not in the way that we have traditionally seen. When I first heard about this core, I was immediately skeptical of the design and worried about paddles becoming too hot. If foam cores have taught us anything in the last year, it's that they usually break. I've put this paddle through about 3 weeks of abuse, both playing with it on court, letting it bake inside my car, as well as cutting one open and trying to bake it with a hairdryer. In that time, nothing has changed about the paddle. It has not gotten hotter in any capacity, which is amazing to see. I actually spoke to Spartus about this and asked if the foam could expand, and they told me no, it should never be able to expand. Unfortunately, while they're filing for their patent, they don't want the information to be public knowledge about what they did, but from what they've explained to me, it shouldn't be possible, and from the testing that I have observed, it hasn't happened yet. After doing this, I kept a hairdryer on the Olympus for about 5 minutes, and there was zero change in the foam size. I also let it bake on the dashboard of my car on a 83-degree day with no issues. So, while perhaps this isn't the most scientific test in the world, I do feel like it was a reasonably fair test to see if the foam would expand under situations that you're probably not really putting your paddle through frequently. So in terms of foam expansion issues, I have not seen anything that suggests it's going to be a problem, but I've only used this paddle for 3 weeks, so we're gonna have to wait and see when more people get their hands on it and if they report any issues. I'm not gonna say it's impossible that something else could break, but so far it's looking good. Also, according to Spartus, the intent behind filling the core with foam wasn't for power, but rather changing the feel of the ball off of the face. Now, the only thing I do kind of have a gripe with is Spartus has traditionally had cheaper paddles on the market, so their 90-day warranty was easier to stomach. Usually a cheaper price will give you a worse warranty. Now that Spartus is reaching $200 with the Olympus, I would have liked to see them extend that warranty to at least 6 months because it is reaching into that more premium product territory. The Olympus is an interesting 14mm paddle to me. These are not something I have traditionally enjoyed all that much. There are several exceptions to this, but generally speaking, I prefer 16mm. In today's game, with how much more powerful 16mm paddles have become, the stability trade-off and the harsher feel of most 14mm I haven't really found to be all that appealing. The Olympus is one of the few 14mm that I have really enjoyed using this year, and I think a lot of that has to do with the foam inside the core making the paddle feel more dense. It feels less flimsy all around the face, and the drop off from center to edge isn't nearly as drastic as other 14mm I've used. The best word I can use to describe the Olympus is full. It actually reminds me of how the Paddletech 12.7mm or Engage Pursuit Pro 1 feel off the face, but with those two, there's a very noticeable drop off in how the paddle feels as you make your way toward the edges. It starts to feel a lot more flimsy or hollow, whereas on the Olympus, the drop off isn't nearly as prevalent, presumably due to that foam. Alright, editing Chris here. One thing I just wanted to make clear, because as I'm watching this video back, I realized I talked about the Paddletech 12.7mm a bunch, and you're probably wondering why I didn't compare it to the 14mm, since they're both 14mm paddles. The main reason for this was when I tested the 12.7 millimeter, I felt like it reminded me more of the Olympus than the 14 did, specifically in how the ball felt off of the face. So that's why all of my reference points were to the 12.7 millimeter. Now, later when you hear me talk about the sweet spot, I actually do think the 14 millimeter is reasonably comparable to the Olympus, though I would still give the sweet spot edge to the Olympus. So I just wanted you guys to be aware. That's why you're going to hear me talk about the 12.7 millimeter a bunch in this video. When it comes to power, I would categorize the PaddleTech 12.7 millimeter as a power paddle, while the Olympus is in a trickier spot. It teeters right on the line of being at the bottom of the power category or at the very, very top of all court leaning toward power. The Olympus has access to great pop and power when you want it, but if you're expecting it to hit as hard as a Yola Mod, Gearbox, or Ripple, then I think you would be disappointed. For most of you watching this video, I think that's actually a good thing. Power paddles usually come with a number of drawbacks, one of them being control. And I find that the Olympus, for being a 14 millimeter, actually has a solid amount of control still. Because the pop isn't so over the top off the face, I don't feel like I have to baby the ball nearly as much when I'm playing. But please don't confuse this with the paddle being easy to use. I don't want people who are used to control-oriented paddles to think you'll just pick this paddle up and have no adjustment period. I think the area the Olympus excels the most on court is at the net for hands battles and counters. With it being so maneuverable, if your strengths lend themselves to speeding up and countering, this is only going to make that even better. Now, on the other hand, if you're someone who consistently struggles in the mid-court or dinking with paddles that are on the poppier side, I would be a bit cautious buying this paddle, or at a minimum, just know there's going to be a period of time where you'll have to get adjusted. Overall, I found it easier than most 14 millimeter paddles to adjust to. I think one of those reasons is the sweet spot, which we'll talk about next. The Olympus just does a really good job at striking a great balance of giving you pop and power without making it sacrifice every ounce of the rest of the paddle. Oftentimes, these heavy power paddles have a less satisfying feel off the face, more dead spots, or they just have so much pop and power that they become hard to control. The Olympus doesn't suffer from this nearly as badly as some of the top power paddles on the market. The Olympus sweet spot I found to be very good for a 14 millimeter. Now, I want to be very clear about this. This is still a 14 millimeter paddle, and while it is improved from the other 14 millimeters on the market, this is not an oversized sweet spot. If you frequently miss center, you're going to notice a feel and power drop off more so than a very forgiving or stable paddle. So I do think this paddle is going to be targeted for slightly higher level players. I don't think it's anywhere near as difficult to use as the true power paddles on the market, but that also doesn't mean it's easy to use. If you put it up against paddles like the Pro XR Signature 13mm, PaddleTech 12.7mm, Black Diamond 14mm, and Engage Pursuit Pro 1, I think the Olympus has a better feel and sweet spot than all of those. Of those paddles, the Engage Pursuit 1 was probably the most comparable in terms of sweet spot size, but it was still lacking that fullness feeling that the Olympus gives you. Otherwise, the other paddles felt like a typical thinner paddle where there's a clear drawback outside of that sweet spot. Now, I did customize my Olympus just a bit. I think it's very playable out of the box, but the main thing I wanted to do was add a little bit more stability since I am used to thicker paddles, as well as wanting more plow through to make my drives be just a little bit faster. I ended up using the Pickleball Effect tungsten tape that is 0.5 grams per inch and putting it all the way up the left and right sides of the paddle. Surprisingly, this only bumped the swing weight up to 110 from 107. So it wasn't a huge increase to the swing weight, and I did get the extra power and stability that I was looking for. The only other thing I did to this paddle was I added a pink extra small Core and an overgrip, but this isn't something that I think everyone needs to do. I've just been enjoying how they feel. All right, so to wrap this up, the Olympus is a really nice paddle, and it's something that I would consider competing with. I've used it for the last 3 weeks, and it's something that I have thoroughly enjoyed testing. The Olympus combines a package with a lot of things that I think are really appealing in today's game. It's fast in the hand, it's poppy, it's powerful without being over the top, it has a great feel for a 14 millimeter, and a sweet spot that is better than a lot of thinner paddles that I've hit in recent times, which I think those last two aspects are really key improvements to a 14 millimeter that are kind of underrated. It's not something that's overly flashy on paper, but it's something that I think translates well really on court and makes the paddle a lot more playable. And in my opinion, one thing that companies should be focusing on in today's game is making the paddles more playable and user-friendly rather than just trying to give us as much pop and power as humanly possible. If that pop and power comes at the sacrifice of feel feel, sweet spot, and control, it's not that helpful unless you're a very high level player. So improvements like this, I think, open the paddle up to more people. If I had to make an avatar of a person that I think this paddle is for, it would be someone who liked the PaddleTech 12.7mm, but wished it had less pop and power and with a lower swing weight. Someone who likes to be aggressive at the net and counters are a strong suit of theirs, and someone who enjoys being able to customize a low swing weight paddle and make it what they want it to be rather than being limited by how it came out of the box. Now, the person I don't think it's for is someone who doesn't like light paddles and doesn't enjoy customizing them, someone who wants the paddle to help absorb energy and assist them in controlling the ball as much as possible, and someone who wants high stability for off-center shots. And again, I'm very happy to see that this paddle didn't change during the 3 weeks of testing, because like we've seen throughout the year, a lot of foam core paddles have had inherent flaws, and it's nice to see that we're possibly making progress toward a day where maybe foam isn't as problematic as it has been. It's too early to say that the Olympus has completely solved this or that it's perfect, but it's nice to see that there hasn't been issues in the time that I used it. So anyways, this is a really great 14mm paddle that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.